Good evening, everybody. So welcome to our Podium Performance Series this evening with special guests Barry Morrison and Renée. Before we begin, I would like to first take a moment to connect with the land that we're currently on. We are fortunate enough to be gathering virtually today across Turtle Island, and we want to recognize the original occupants of the places where we reside. I'm joining you virtually from Moncton, New Brunswick, but I would like to acknowledge that New Brunswick is situated on the unceded and unsurrendered traditional territories of the Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, and Passamaquoddy nations. This territory is unceded as the peace and friendship treaties signed in 1725 and 1726 did not surrender the lands. I would also like to acknowledge that we are here to learn and share knowledge, which was a practice that was intentionally restricted among Indigenous peoples. I would also encourage you to take a moment to recognize and connect with the land you're on today and reflect on what it means to live, work, and play where we are. Now, without further ado, I would like to high five it to my friends, Barry and Renée, to take it over for this evening's session.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and thanks, Manon. Renee and I will kind of do some quick introductions on our background in a minute, but first I just wanted to set the stage a bit on this presentation. The idea of never giving up and the importance of implementing kind of mental performance and mental resilience strategies within our program. When Manon came and asked to talk about this on behalf of our UNB season this past fall, I thought it was a great opportunity to share some of the things that we've done. And it was critical that we include Renee in this conversation with us as well as the mental performance coach for the team, because really a lot of our ability to have the season we had this year came about because of the work that we've done really over the last 5 years with the program in developing kind of an integrated mental performance aspect to our program, which has really been the driver of what we've done. So, just to give everyone a bit of an understanding about why we're talking about our UNB season and the idea of never giving up this year, uh, is because that was a bit of the story of our season. Is we had a season counter to what we had expected and what we had planned for. Over the last 4 years since COVID, we've basically been a team that's placed third in our conference through league play, lost in a semifinal, and and then kind of watched the finalists head off to nationals. This year, coming into the year, we were determined to change that story, change that storyline, and change the way that that ended. We'd implemented some new things for our team, really pushing them towards the concept of growing up and introducing a 360 mindset, an idea that really kind of drove technical, tactical, physical, mental, social, and cultural pillars for our team that gave us the ability to kind of have full performances or more grown up, more mature ways to approach the game. Uh, Coming into the season again, as I said, our plan was qualify for AUS finals, get ourselves to nationals, and that would be great. But the season didn't start that way. We struggled. We struggled throughout the year. We ended up really kind of heading into the last few weeks of the season, wondering if playoffs were going to be a reality. AUS, our playoffs were hosted here at UNB, so we were scared that we might be embarrassed not to be in the playoffs that we were hosting. We were struggling to get those final points and to get that last opportunity into playoffs, really until the second half of our final game of the season, where we needed uh, a draw to get through, and went into halftime down 2-0. So having a bit of a mountain to climb, 45 minutes potentially left in our season, we were able to find the two goals we needed to get into playoffs, get some performances in playoffs, and then find ourselves heading to nationals as we had planned all along. So a different path for us to get there, but still achieving some of the goal that we'd set out for the year, and really a lot of that driven by the mental performance that we had built into the team and integrated into everything that we do over the last 4 or 5 years of the program. So we're excited to have a chance to talk about this today. We're going to try and make this relatable to all of you as coaches in terms of how you might apply things to your context. We're going to try and tell you some stories about how we got here over the last 5 years in terms of getting ourselves to the point that we could have some of the performances or could dig deep into our kind of mental resilience strategies heading into the year. What we're going to really focus on over the course of the talk today is really that cycle of integration of the mental performance that we brought in. And we're going to talk about the intake and integration as the first step that we take, the developing of a team identity and the emergence of team identity from season to season, how we see that, how that's played out for us, how culture and language underpins everything that we do. Culture and language drives a lot of our identity, drives a lot of how we intervene, and drives a lot of our debrief and reflections. We're going to talk about interventions, and interventions are a key piece of the year that we had this year. They're also a key piece of how we continue to develop the group and build the resilience that we've had as a team. And then we're going to talk a little bit about reflections and debrief, and how that kind of continues to propel the team, forward from year to year. I think it's important to recognize that although we've kind of looked at this as a bit of a roadmap and a bit of a process, these things kind of recycle throughout any period of time within the program. So they don't always happen sequentially in order. We don't always go from one to the next. Sometimes we back up, depending on what's needed with the team and depending on what's needed at the time. So we're going to do our best to talk us through that and build an understanding for what we've experienced over the last 5 years to have performances this year that were really valuable for us. Quick little introductions of Renee and I. So me, I'm Barry Morrison. I'm the head men's soccer coach here at UNB. I also work in the youth soccer environment with the Fredericton District Soccer Association. I'm a coach developer with Coach New Brunswick. And really a lot of what I've tried to do over my time as the coach here at UNB is kind of take what I learn as a coach developer and the principles that we have through the NCCP and integrate those into our program. And a big part of that was integrating mental performance and working with Renee. Renee, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so hi everybody, my name's Renee. I am the mental performance consultant with UNB Men's Soccer, as well as some other provincial or national organizations and teams. I've been with the team for, the last 5 years. So we started in COVID, and in my role, really, like, we take the three letters of the IST, the integrated support team, really seriously. And so it's been really fun to be integrated in that environment and to come and observe and support the team in a variety of different capacities and different roles and things. And then, to just feel like it is part of a team. So we collaborate and we do everything together and find ways to make sure that all of our strengths kind of play off of one another so that everything gets stronger the more that we work together.
Yeah. So where do we start? We want to start kind of with a bit of a story about how we got here, and intake and integration are the first step in our roadmap. So we want to kind of tie in a little bit of what happens within the intake and integration process. My role as a coach, Renee's role as our mental performance consultant. So with intake and integration, first thing that happened was we've got to find the right people to work with and get the right kind of ideas in the room. So in 2020, the UNB Reds introduced kind of the mental performance consultant role as part of the overall IST, supporting us as teams to work with different mental performance consultants. I was really excited about this opportunity, and I reached out to Renee, who I had a chance to work with both through NCCP kind of workshops as a coach developer, as well as often connecting with Renee at different kind of informal coaching networking opportunities. So some of the coaching and coffee opportunities that were offered through Coach New Brunswick, or other opportunities for coaches to connect and network. Getting a chance to understand a bit about what drove Renee, how she worked. So being given the opportunity to bring in a mental performance consultant, first person I reached out to was Renee and started to pitch my idea. I wanted something that was integrated. I wanted something that moved beyond weekly presentations or monthly presentations to the team, and really started to be something that we could build into the day-to-day environment we had, right? Something that would inform our practice planning, something that would inform how we speak with the players and how we bring things in. First step in that was really connecting with Renee, sharing my objective for what we wanted to look like, sharing a bit about my philosophy, how I believed I wanted to coach and build the team, and then working with Renee to lay some of the groundwork that would begin to form the way that our team kind of would act, would behave, and would see the different aspects of mental performance played out throughout our program. So kind of in the intake and integration period, Renee and I really worked to develop a bit of a roadmap for where we wanted to go over a few years. Thinking about us starting with some visualization, introducing that, building visualization into deeper imagery. We talked a lot in 2022 about painting pictures, what that looked like. We moved that into kind of the idea of building athletes who are capable of problem solving, understanding the difficulties of the game and how we match and we problem solve within those moments. And then from there into 2024, this year, we really kind of began to introduce our 360 mindset and that idea of kind of full performances that were well-rounded and supported by several different pillars that would allow us to kind of develop in different areas and compete in some really meaningful ways.
Yeah, and so it's funny that Barry very briefly talked about finding people that are a really good fit as part of that intake piece, right? Because one of the things that he maybe glossed over a little bit was in our initial intake meeting where we kind of talked, I grilled him a little bit on his philosophy, right? Like getting him to not just tell me how it was written as like, you know, a coach developer or as it's written on paper, but really like, how do you live it? What's important to you? What are those values? How does that tie into how you've designed your training programs and how you see this working, right? Because the clearer that philosophy is, the better you can actually figure out if like your service providers for anybody on an IST, whether that be strength and conditioning or athletic therapy or nutrition or mental performance, right? The more that you can have that really clear picture, the better it tends to be, right? So I came at him with like general questions in terms of like how he wants to communicate or how he sees my integration working, right? And one of the things that he actually said to me was like, my door is always open, which I've worked with a lot of teams and a lot of coaches. And so I kind of put that to the test in that I said, all right, whenever I see your car, which is pictured down here, I'm going to stop by and just say hello. And we might not have, you know, a schedule or a formal meeting, but are you okay with that? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And so true to his word, every single time that I see his car on campus, outside of our field, I come over and I say hello and yeah, his door actually is always open if he is there, right? So again, it was one of those things of we knew it was a good fit because both of us understood how we wanted to talk and how we wanted to work, and that if one of us wanted more structure or wants to schedule a meeting, then we find a time to do that. But we also both work in that, yeah, I just want you to feel like you are welcome here anytime. And so feel free to come in and to do those things, right? So over the years, the idea of establishing those building blocks of painting the pictures and building in cues and doing all those things has led us to build in some deeper goals and objectives. And one of the big ones that I kind of saw last year and then that led into this year is that one of our bigger barriers was this idea that in order to make it to nationals, we would have to get the bye in the AUS playoffs, right? Without a bye to the semis, then as a team, we weren't going to make it, right? So that was kind of the genesis of the idea of the 360 mindset is we saw that there was a problem, but that we as a staff could actually address for the players, right? And so the idea was let's just get beyond that problem, and no matter what situation we got ourselves into, whether that was with a bye or it wasn't, it was just getting into playoffs, it didn't matter what it was, we were prepared to deal with anything because we had built all 6 of our pillars. So technically, tactically, physically, mentally, socially, and culturally, we were ready for a complete game, right? We were ready for 360 minutes. So that's four 90-minute games. So no matter what we had to face, we were ready and equipped to do those things. We could solve the problem. But yeah, a lot of it had to do with just getting over the fact that if the situation wasn't perfect, we could still adapt and we could overcome those things. So that, as a mental performance consultant, was really cool to kind of walk in and be like, okay, here's the problem that we've identified, which is that things have to be perfect. How can we use the pieces that we've built in with our philosophy, with our goals, with our objectives? How can we build this, or how can we use and leverage the relationship that we've built over the last 5 years to actually push ourselves beyond where we currently are?
And that became kind of a really important piece as we head into each year. We typically start to kind of set the tone for building our identity early in the year, right? As we finish one year and we get ready to head into the next year, we tend to use some of our reflections and some of our thoughts on the previous year to begin to build kind of towards where our next place is. And the 360 mindset really became a foundation that was going to lead to us, developing our identity and who we were going to be in our 2024 season. We were moving on from the concept of being problem solvers in 2023 and into a new kind of mindset and identity in 2024. So as we move from that integration, that intake, that beginning to kind of start this process, it became important for us to then start to understand kind of who we were going to be in each of these different time periods in each of these different years. And it's important to recognize that the idea of an identity with a team is ever evolving, it's ever changing, and it's really a process of co-creation with the coaches, right? Our role as coaches, we've always felt, or I've always felt, is to begin developing an idea and an identity by creating language that can help players to connect with their best performances, creating language that can help to focus players on what is our task for that year or what is our task for that time period. That language doesn't always lead to the image that the players most powerfully connect with as an identity, but it starts to lay the groundwork and it starts to create the conversation and create the places for them to kind of see things go. Again, for us, our identity shifted year to year, or has shifted year to year over our time competing in the AUS and playing in games. Really, in 2021, we were just beginning to understand ourselves. I was new to the coaching role. We had a lot of senior players who had been ingrained in a very specific identity previous to me. We had a lot of new players who weren't sure what university soccer was, and we had a lot of discovery to do over the year in the first season in the AUS post COVID. In 2022, we came back and we started to have a clearer identity. We started to know a little bit more about who we were and who we wanted to be. We talked a lot in that year about the players really viewing themselves as being hungry, as being dogs, as being a group of athletes that really wanted to go out, that wanted to compete, and that wanted to kind of chase opportunities for themselves. So we saw a lot of that language and a lot of that imagery come out throughout the year for us in 2022. In 2023, as I talked, as we had been developing in the integration of our mental performance, we came into the year as a staff using a lot of language that involved problem solving. So we had really been working to integrate some of the things that we had built from a mental imagery side and a mental kind of performance side, imagery, players understanding, painting pictures, understanding their roles, really understanding kind of the visuals that they could connect with. And we worked into becoming problem solvers in our 2023 season. And what that meant was we started to frame practices as what are the soccer problems we're going to solve. We started to empower the players to talk about solutions, and we talked about kind of the way we were going to do things in very specific ways, which allowed us to really become strongly identified with that action or with those characteristics. And then in 2024, as we continued to evolve, we started to think about our 360 mindset. We started to think about some of the challenges we faced over the year. We became really a team that focused on an identity of we are, and that what we are changed several times over the course of the season. It evolved at different moments and different times, right? At some times, we are represented resilience. Sometimes we are was brought into other language that we use and became core for us, like brave or aggressive. And we worked to see and help this identity flourish through the team by one, giving the athletes an opportunity to see themselves and express how they felt, but also by us, finding and choosing and developing deliberate language that continued to foster that growth of identity and that belief in identity.
Yeah, and so it was really important for us that we weren't imposing an identity on the team, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going out there and performing. So a lot of the work that we did on identity was pushing identity, or this idea that identity could mean more than just your technical abilities or your tactical strategies into the game model that you're playing, right? So a lot of it had to do with, okay, what are the behaviors, or what are the traits, or what are, again, those more social, mental, or cultural aspects that we bring into it, right? And so we took some key phrases that the players or that the coaches had in mind, and then we got the athletes to, again, participate in the process of cultivating this identity of who they wanted to be, by tying it back to, okay, what are the behaviors, or what is the evidence, what are the examples that show us that this is our identity? Because one of the pitfalls that a lot of programs fall into when they're coming up with an identity is that they model themselves off of other successful teams, right? And so if there's a team that they look up to, or there's a team that has experienced a lot of success, they often try to embody those traits, as opposed to instead questioning, what are the traits that make us who we are, and how do we bring those things out? How can we live this, or be almost an authentic version of who we are? And so that required a lot of reflection. It required a lot of questioning. It required a lot of revision, right? So that was part of the idea of this year, was we didn't have to keep our identity static, but instead we could just bring out the traits that made us who we are. We could highlight some of them in certain moments, and we could put others maybe a little bit more in the background at other times, but we could pick and choose the things that made us who we are, knowing that we had a variety of different personalities, we had a variety of different strengths. And so we could leverage those things to achieve success. And having those differences became something that was valued, as opposed to something that we wanted to try and kind of funnel into having one core identity. As it said, no, all these different pieces can actually work together, whether that is different identities from a playing perspective, or from a staff perspective, or from a coach perspective. All of those things can work together, as long as we make room and have a willingness to kind of take the perspective of other people within the program.
Yeah, and as we kind of think about building on how that identity is fluid and really comes from the experiences that we're having with the team, we can look back at 2023. And as I said, we started that year by really imparting a thought of us being problem solvers. And then that really started to ingrain itself within our team and within our behaviors as we played more competitive matches. So the first time that it really came about was the second game of our season. We were playing away to St. FX. They scored on us early. We went into halftime down 1-0, and had felt that they had the better run of play in the first half. The players had a lot of thoughts on what had happened, what they needed to do, how we could fix kind of the problem that had been presented to us. We went out in the second half, changed our performance around a bit, and were able to draw the game level, and then take the lead late in the game to win 2-1 away to St. FX. For many of the players, it was the first time they beat St. FX in their career, and was a really exciting moment. Coming back into the locker room at that time, we really identified strongly with, well, we solved the problem. They were very difficult, but we were able to find different ways or different tactics that we could use to impose our own will on the game. That continued to be a trend for us throughout the season. We would continue to go down early in games, conceding goals, creating a problem for ourselves, and then solving that problem and finding a way to win, or finding a way to come back and create a draw. So it created a real strong identity, and the players constantly talked about themselves as problem solvers. It meant that we felt that there was never a moment that we weren't in a game or weren't capable of coming back. But it also, as that concept of us being problem solvers grew stronger and grew more powerful, it also created another problem, that if we didn't have a problem to solve, we struggled as a team. And what that led to is that led to us, conceding early in games when we didn't need to, because we didn't feel like we had enough challenge or enough problem. And then it led ultimately to us in 2023 having a crash out of playoffs in the semifinal where, you know, excuse me, we weren't ready for the problem that we were going to have to solve. So, yeah, I'm very emotional about our semifinal in that year. But so that made it really difficult for us. We had to now come beyond that idea of just being problem solvers and be able to have that complete performance. Again, reinforcing the reason that we introduced the 360-degree language as we came into our year this year in 2024. And that really ties in tightly. Like, so as we started to introduce new language, move ourselves from language of problem solvers to language of 360 degrees, language of growing up, language of becoming a more resilient team, language of becoming a team that was going to be capable of imposing our kind of style of play onto games and being able to kind of be in control of things from the start. It became really important that we started to think about the language even more clearly and even more closely as we went into the year, understanding that language language and culture matching up really need to come back to what are the goals, what's our philosophy, and what were some of the things that we established at the intake and at the onset of our kind of quote project, right? Integrating the mental performance into our team and maintaining that. And we needed to start to think about how are we reinforcing our identity and our standards through the behaviors? How are we using language as a way to set intentions and bring focus to things, or bring focus away from things based on how we choose to build the language within our team? When we start to think about language and culture, we also think about culture really as being how we identify the standards that we set. You know, what are the standards that we have within our culture? What are our expectations of ourselves? What are our expectations of each other? And what do we accept and what do we address? All contribute to defining our culture. And we work hard to do that across the program, right? And that can be in how we speak and use intentional language about what we're doing in practice, how we speak and use intentional language about, you know, what we expect each and every day. So building those pieces start to kind of reinforce each other. As we progress through any sort of season, we adapt our language to fit the state of that season or the moment that we might feel we're in within that season. So using that language to really reinforce, draw attention to, or maybe even distract from can be really important pieces. And week to week, we might talk as a group of coaches in conjunction with Renée about what language do we want to lean into? What language is gaining positive response? What language have we been using that is starting to fall flat with players? And how do we continue to evolve that and see that kind of grow to build, define, and hold our culture intact?
Yeah, and so a lot of those conversations and the language that's used or the discussions that are had there, this year in particular was maybe a little bit different than in years past because we started to get a little bit more buy-in across the coaching staff in terms of wanting to all be on the same page and using common language. So that way, whenever Barry used a term and one of the other coaches used a term or I used it, we were all saying the same thing in the same way so that, again, the message could then sink in a little bit more clearly, right? And so a lot of those conversations are actually what drove one of my favorite things that's been established in our culture, which is after one of our later season debrief talks, Barry and I were noticing that there was a problem with the players kind of letting one of their opponents get into their heads. And I just casually threw away like the sentence of like, we're letting him live in our heads rent free. And Barry took that and went into the debrief and expanded on it to the players. And like based on their reaction to that, I went to my office and printed out what we called eviction notices. So I found like a legal template for an eviction notice and put in a few of like the key phrases or the key identifiers from the team that season, and then asked Barry if I could come in and put them all over our dressing room before they left for playoffs. And he's like, absolutely. So I put all of those up. And again, based on their reaction to those words and to the language, they then actually, some of them took the eviction notices down and took them with them to playoffs, and then actually gave them to the player after they had beaten their team and said, like, you've been evicted from our heads, right? But that's how powerful that language can be if you actually take the time to kind of pause and sit and look at how can we use this to shape things in the direction that we want them to go? How can we carefully craft a message, or how can we use language that players connect with and that actually drives the behaviors that we want to see? Because that's really powerful when you're not just using words for the sake of saying something, but that message can be tied to something actionable. Because then you actually get, or you start to see progress, or you start to see results, or you sometimes see things where you're like, we didn't get this right. We just need to shift this word, or we need to change this one thing. But without creating a culture of everybody that's within the program being on the same page, we don't get the same results, right? So to me, that was one of the things that was maybe different this year than previous years, is we had a coaching staff that were all willing to use the same language and that really wanted to build a culture of, these are our standards, this is what we want to do. How do we do those things? And so one of the first questions that I got this year from one of our team member, or one of our coaching staff, is like, how do we get the players to do the things that we want to? And we said it starts with you, right? Like, so the culture starts with you as a coach. If you model the behaviors that you want to see, if you use the language that you want them to hear, if we start painting the picture for them, if we start using the cues, if we start demonstrating those things and modeling those behaviors, they will get on board much more quickly. And sure enough, the more we modeled things, the more we used the language that we wanted to hear from them, the more that we connected that language to different behaviors, the clearer that picture became, and the more we were able to progress and grow and push concepts forward and get ourselves closer to our goals.
Yeah, and as we applied some of this to this year specifically, one of the things we found was that language and that coaching staff that were on the same page really made a big difference. And we would shift language week to week, or sometimes middle of a week, based on what we were seeing as responses from the players. And it was important, to have observation. So as coaches, we would observe and see what we felt. Oftentimes, Renee was a great trigger when she would come and watch training sessions and see, like, okay, as we talk about that, I see players not comfortable. I see players moving beyond it. I see players kind of not hearing it. We spent several weeks this year in what we felt were must-win games, right? We were very lucky. The rest of the league kept gifting us week after week opportunities and opportunities. But we had a lot of times that we thought, if we don't get points this weekend, if we don't win games this weekend, we're in big trouble. And the players knew that, and we knew that. And we would have to shift our language from week to week, or sometimes throughout the week, to go from being maybe outcome focused. We need points, we need wins, we need to climb the standings. Sometimes we needed that language, but sometimes that language was getting old and wasn't resonating with the players or motivating the players. We might need to move to more performance based language or process based language, where we're talking about, what are the key metrics, what are our standards, how are we meeting those standards, and having to kind of go through and live in some of those moments at times in order, again, to connect with the players and help them understand what is our task, what is our job. Sometimes we had to draw attention towards the outcome. Sometimes we had to draw attention away from the outcome and towards the process. In other moments, we had to talk about some of our behaviors and focus our language on behaviors. So things like, what are our expectations? What are the standards? What's the culture that we're in? And how are those behaviors going to become strong and clear?
One of the things,
Anybody?
sorry, Bear,
Oh,
I'm just going to jump in there, because one of the things that the coaches were really great at doing this year was, whenever a suggestion was brought up, or whenever we brought up evidence as to why we needed to shift the language, they were completely adaptable and willing to do those things, right? So it's it's one thing to be offered or to be given a suggestion. It's a whole other thing to actually follow through on it. But it's one of those things that I think made a world of a difference, was to be able to shift the language based on the needs of the team at that time. And that, again, requires a lot of self reflection. It requires a lot of self awareness, but it is something that as coaches, you can absolutely cultivate even without an external, like mental performance consultant or an external observer needing to do that, right? It just requires that intentionality to kind of monitor and keep track of the things that you're saying for yourself and what the response is like from players, right? So are they actively engaging? Are they leaning in when you're saying certain things? Or are they maybe stepping away? Or are they, turning their heads to the side? Or are they actively being distracted by other things when you are using certain phrases? But keeping that awareness there and being adaptable to changing the way that you phrase certain things, really important, and a really great skill that any coach can develop if they're willing to do so.
Yeah. And and as we built that through this year, as we talked about, we were implementing new things. We were trying to kind of grow up. We were trying to be a more resilient team. We had to change some of how we played. We had to move to playing in a way that maybe took a little more risk for some of the players or put them in situations where they were a little bit less comfortable. Putting them in places where they had to kind of make decisions that they may look bad at times, but they know teammates are going to have their back, and they know teammates are going to come through and ensure that they finish the job for them, right, or get the defensive task done specifically. And anybody who came and watched our playoffs, or even probably listened to it on TV, probably heard a lot of the language that became key for us, which was really brave and aggressive. We would come in after games and joke that we had 5 words that we would use from the bench, but and people might think we sound crazy, and people might think it sounded nuts, but we created meaning in that language, and meaning for the players, that all they needed was those 2 or 3 words. They knew what that meant. They knew what that action was. We had built that language into everything we did in training. We had adapted that language so that every day when we showed up to the field, we were talking about what is a brave behavior. So when we were designing practice, instead of talking about the coaching points being, you know, about about soccer tactics, it was about, what does brave look like in this situation? What does aggressive look like in this situation? So we started to shift and really let the language take control of the decisions the players made. So they started to think about, well, what's brave? What are brave actions? How do I think bravely? How am I reminded to be brave? What's that risk? What am I being brave for? What am I being brave about? And it really, again, allowed the players to take control of moments within the game. It allowed the players to have the freedom to do what they needed to do, because bravery was about their own self-expression. Bravery was about them playing outside of their own comfort zone at times. Bravery was about them doing the things that they needed to, knowing that their teammates were going to have their back, knowing that their teammates were going to be the next step. We needed to be able to be closer and tighter as a team. We talked a lot about aggressive, right? Aggressive being act quickly, act without hesitation, act in ways that allow us to remove indecision and make the decision that we feel is appropriate in the moment, and everybody will go with us. The rest of the team will come, and the rest of the team will believe. And by really digging in to that language, we created greater clarity, and we evolved that language over time. We evolved that language from brave and aggressive to braver and uncompromising, and we continued to add what that meant. We continued to be able to layer on with that language the next level of what we needed from our performance. So you could see over the last kind of several games of our season, you could see us making decisions that uh, felt a little bit. They felt uncomfortable at times watching video back or watching from the sidelines. You could see it, but you could see that we had a whole team willing to make those decisions together, willing to progress in that way together, because we used the language to drive our culture and to drive our players' belief in each other, which became a really powerful piece for us this fall, and a big part of the resilience that allowed us to have struggle, to have difficulty, but come through and find performance for us over time. Um, and again, much of this then kind of becomes part of the evolution of the group that we built, and it relies on us kind of finding opportunities to make, I guess, interventions within the team, uh, to build into that next layer or that next step.
Yeah, so interventions, it's one of those things. It's a big scary word, or it's a really fun and exciting word in that it's not super common to do them, right? Now, a lot of the times when people think of like mental performance interventions, they often think back to what Barry and I discussed in our intake of not wanting to do. Don't come in and do a classroom session just based around a mental skill, or don't just do a standard presentation, or don't come in just with like cookie cutter information. Instead, part of the really nice thing about being integrated into the environment is that we could tailor interventions if they were necessary to what was necessary in that moment. Now, interventions are oftentimes like really big ones that we talk about or that we get excited for, that we will discuss for years to come, aren't things that you want to resort to first, right? So a lot of the times when I talk to people about interventions, we really want to identify, okay, what's the core component that we want to intervene on? Is it a problem that has to do with motivation? Is it a problem that has to do with cohesion? Is it a problem that has to do with confidence? What's the larger like component that we want to address with this intervention, and what have we tried before getting to the point where an intervention is necessary? Or what time do we have left so that a drastic intervention maybe isn't necessarily the option that we need to be using, right? But we go through all of the different options, and again, talking and collaborating with all of the members of the staff on whether or not we feel like an intervention is necessary is really important. But talking it through and really planning and making sure that it's deliberate and that it's delivered at the right time. Because one of the things that often doesn't get discussed is how labor intensive planning for an intervention can be, and also how much time recovering from an intervention can take, right? Or how long the after effects of an intervention will take, right? But whenever we've implemented interventions within our program, it has come with a lot of discussions, a lot of meetings, a lot of intake integration, a lot of identity discussions, and a lot of language and culture discussions. So we've revisited the other areas that we've talked about before getting to it, and then making sure that we find something that aligns properly with where we want to go with our philosophy and with the identity that the team has chosen for themselves or has selected for themselves, right? But a lot of the times, as enticing as interventions might be, I often caution people against using them, or I often try to implement things before we get to a really large scale intervention. Sometimes we might integrate a couple of smaller interventions, or maybe individual or small group interventions before we get to a big team one. But there are certain moments in time, and Barry's just going to get into some of the big ones that we've done. So I'll let you do that. But yeah, know as a coach, your first resort doesn't have to be an intervention, but you can have interventions in your back pocket as a tool that you can use.
Yeah. I think it's important to understand as coaches, we intervene in lots of little ways and little days, day-to-day interventions, day-to-day conversations with players. And when we're talking about some of these interventions, we're talking about kind of relatively big shifting interventions that we need to have. And I've got a couple that we wanted to share that kind of really laid a large amount of the foundation for the group that we've got and the way that our team works now. The very first one was probably was the first major intervention Renee and I kind of collaborated on with the team. And I remember Renee coming into my office because she saw my car parked outside, and I turned my chair, closed my computer, and I said to her, Renee, I'm really worried. I think we're kind of our team's kind of fracturing. I think our team's kind of coming apart. They're having a hard time uh, being on the same page. I don't want to say weren't getting along, but they were kind of getting a little bit clicky and positional about who was getting playing time, who was being selected for the team week to week. And we were starting to kind of have a little bit of trouble. I said, Renee, I think I need to intentionally impart a storm on this team. I need to bring them to a place where we think about the stages of group development, and you might know forming, norming, storming, forming, storming, norming, performing. And I think we need to have a storm. I think we need to break the group down a little bit, and we need to kind of create some new norms. And we're gonna have to do this. I said, and I want your opinion on if one, this is psychologically safe. Two, is my idea ethical, and can we carry this out? And what I pitched to Renee was basically a practice that involved a tournament with uh, with a reward for the winning team and some conditions within the tournament. I wanted to have the winning team get to cut a player that they didn't want to have and select a new player from the team that they had beat. I wanted to force the players to make decisions about friends or people that they've held tightly in their group because they were motivated to win in a certain moment. I wanted to force players to make difficult decisions about and around each other. And Renee kind of thought for a minute. She said, Barry, it's not exactly the way we go about things all the time, but if we put the right things in place, yeah, we can make this work, and we can make this kind of a valuable experience. So Renee and I talked about it. We talked about kind of some of the thoughts and ideas. We both went away and came back a day or so later with, a bit of a deeper understanding. Renee kind of started to think about what are some of the really important things that we need to use? How do we build language into this? How do we ensure we're doing the right things at the right time? How are we deliberately making decisions about who gets to decide who gets cut, who gets to decide, how are we communicating that, what's happening? And it allowed us to scaffold some of this intervention. We had certain moments where players, as they were selecting a player from another team or deselecting a player from theirs, we're telling them, what are the reasons that I'm not going to keep you on my team? Why am I using somebody else to move forward and try and win these games? How am I going to how are we going to kind of carry this out in a way that brings about the change we wanted? So we carry through that practice. We get it. We do it. We work through it. Renee is there. We're kind of checking in between to make sure things are going okay. Make sure that we don't see any signs that this is going drastically awry. I'm a little bit nervous. I don't want to have this kind of end at the end of the day with players rolling their eyes and thinking, well, that was a silly day for me. I didn't want to see us kind of lose credibility for ourselves as coaches. And we kind of get through the session. The players are, by the end of it, we've got a group of probably 8 really happy players. They'd won the tournament. They'd earned the reward for winning the tournament. We've got a group of players that I'm not sure are going to come back at this moment. They're pretty upset. They've just had a really terrible day. And then we've got a couple of groups in the middle that landed, a couple wins, couple losses. They're not thrilled. Some of them are a little bit more upset than others. But we've watched the group go through an experience. We've definitely created a storm at this point. We've done what we intended to do, and we've created that. We then had to go away from this intervention and think about, okay, what are we going to do to bring this back together? How do we tie this group back in? And how do we use this intervention as a productive piece to take us to the next step? So when we came back in the next day, the intent was to have our second debrief of this intervention overall. And by that time, we had established, we had a winning team. They happened to be wearing blue pennies that day. They became the blue team. We had a losing team, a team that kind of crashed out of the tournament. They happened to be wearing orange pennies that day. We called them the orange team. Real creative with the names, but that's how we started to refer to things. What was blue and what was orange? And it allowed us to come back in and start to really debrief the behaviors of each of those teams. We were lucky. We videotaped most of our training sessions, so we were able to see video of it. But we were able to talk to the players about what were their behaviors. What were the behaviors of the blue team that led them to be successful? What were the behaviors of the orange team that had them struggle to succeed? We had the players mix. We had the players talk about those behaviors, talk about those emotions, talk about what they witnessed and what they saw in the games on the previous day. And we were able to use that as a really powerful way for us to talk about where did we want to be as a team? Did we want to be blue? Did we want to be orange? And what were the characteristics of the blue team that we can adopt? What are the characteristics of the orange team that we can recognize and move beyond or push out, right? And how do we start to connect these things? Unintentionally, we created a story that lands within the program, and it's been a story that the players have told or shared over years. And we talk a bit about the moment that some of those players in that game became assistant coaches the next year as they graduated out. They came onto our coaching staff, and we remember a meeting in our office where Renee and I were talking about something and how might we progress, and we made a reference point, and the two new coaches looked at each other and then looked at us and said, "Wait a minute, you mean that all of that last year was intentional? That whole practice was intended? Like we went home and we were fighting with each other, and you did that all on purpose to bring us back in the next day and debrief and carry this forward?" And Renee and I kind of chuckled and said, "Well, yeah, that's the intentionality of what we do, and that's kind of how we build some of these things." So that was a really extreme example uh, of an intervention that took place um, in a training session, and we used the actual practice to build, to guide, and to execute the intervention. Then,
And I think,
oh,
sorry, before you jump into that, like another really important piece of why having integrated members is crucial or can be really helpful is that some of those players in those in between moments were communicating with me and were trying to debrief or reflect with me, right? And so if I hadn't been part of that intervention, I probably wouldn't have been as effective in my role in trying to help them debrief and in getting them to reflect and in getting them to meet with me. Some during the intervention were trying to get me to intervene and get Barry to use different language, not knowing that Barry and I had previously had about 5 meetings discussing specifically what words we would use at which points in time, right? So trying to pit us against each other almost, or trying to have me come in and get them to stop being uncomfortable, right? But knowing that, yeah, we were on the same page and we had discussed these things and we knew that we believed in this intervention and we had designed it with a specific intention and to use it at this specific moment. But you had to commit to it, and everybody that was on staff had to commit to it, because at various points in times the players would have tried to stop us from fully being in it. And if we hadn't debriefed or we hadn't pre-briefed these things, then that intervention probably wouldn't have been as successful as it could have been.
right, yeah, and as it was.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's an example of one that kind of integrated into training, but as well, sometimes interventions happen uh, without training needing to happen. And we had one this year that was a really pivotal moment for us. And again, one that in the moment the players didn't like, but in reflection and in kind of debriefing the year, the players all brought up as being a really pivotal space for them. And we were heading into a space, or we were in a period again this season where things weren't going as expected. We were worried about where things were going to land. We were having trouble, and the players were getting frustrated, and that's natural when they're not winning games. We've got a very competitive group of athletes. They're here to achieve and here to be successful. So they're unhappy when things aren't going the way they want. And we had been talking about, well, we're going to need to find a chance to intervene. And I don't always like interventions because they're stressful for me. They're difficult. They're really, they're really kind of hard to carry out. They take a lot of vulnerability from us as coaches because we have to take a big risk in order to really carry out the intervention. So oftentimes I'll kind of say, okay, well, can't we do it in a small way? Can't we do it in a way that doesn't take a big risk? And after a couple of days of us saying, well, no, we're going to need to get to a place where we demand a standard of the players and we don't let them off the hook for it. And we had been in a moment of players being frustrated, and we had to kind of come in and say, okay, gang, look, we need you to go away tonight after practice and before you come back in tomorrow. We need you to have a conversation with your teammates. We need you to find people that you're frustrated with, or that you need to let out some tension with, or that you need to talk to. And we need you to start to talk to them. You need to be emotional. You need to be a little bit vulnerable, and you're going to need to talk to each other, because if we don't start to talk to each other in meaningful and powerful ways, we're not going to get to where we need to this season. We're not going to recover from kind of the slump we're in, and we're not going to grow as a team and achieve our potential. And this was kind of an assignment, a homework piece for the team. We said, look, when we come back in tomorrow, we're going to start with with this feedback, and then we're going to get into our training session. I want to know what sorts of conversations you have, and we want to be able to build some of these conversations and some of this vulnerability from you as players into, the next pieces of our program. So we came back in the next day, and we did our regular prep. We reviewed the video we had planned to review. We talked about the training session we were going to have. We looked a little bit at the previous day's training session. We did everything we normally would for a practice. And then as we kind of finished that team meeting, thinking that I was asking a pretty simple question, I said, all right, anybody care to share a conversation they had with a teammate? Blank stares, everybody looking at each other, everybody kind of going, okay, I don't really know what to say. I looked at one of our assistants and he kind of shrugged at me. And in my head, I'm saying, okay, well, we can't let them off the hook. We've got to now double down, and we've got to now make sure that they complete this task, because we feel this is really critical to us achieving. So I said, look, we haven't met our assignment. We haven't done our homework. We're not going to train today. You guys can get changed. Thanks for coming. Make sure you have those conversations tonight. When we come back in order for us to train, we're going to have to have converse at some point. So we come back into my office as coaches, and okay, we're in panic mode. What do we do now? We've just canceled training. We need to be training. This is an important moment. Well, no, it's more important that we get through this tension within the team. How is that going to go? What are we going to do next? What happens if they come back tomorrow? We had all of these questions and all of these thoughts. When one of the players kind of comes and walks into the office and he laughs, says, okay, guys, this is really cute, but all the guys are in the locker room. We're ready to train. When are we going to go out and train? We said, look, we're not going to train until we've had this conversation. We're not going to train until we've dug deep enough. Well, we've had the talk. We all know what we need to say. We're ready. Let's just do this, coach. So I said, okay, no problem. Get the guys. We're going to meet, and we're going to sit in the end zone. We're going to have this chat. So we meet in the end zone of our soccer field, and moral of the story, we don't get to training. We talk for the next hour. We engage the players. We challenge them to think deeper. We challenge them on whether or not they're ready to kind of be vulnerable enough to turn around the results that we haven't been getting. We know that we're capable of better performances. We've seen it. We understand that we're close, that we're just on the cusp, and we believe we're on the right track, but we need to get through some of these frustrations. It led to actually a really powerful moment. Renée, who so often speaks to the team through the coaches, right? Through the integration. She's an integrated part of our staff, so doesn't always take a front seat. But on a moment where one of the players kind of says, look, Barry, I would do anything to be successful for this team. I would do whatever it took. And I have a moment of weakness, about to let this player off the hook as we've been having an emotional conversation for the last 30 minutes, and say, look, we know, or we believe that you feel that way. And Renée pipes up from about 25 feet away and just says, no, I don't believe you would do that. I don't believe you would run through a wall for your teammates. I don't believe you would kill yourself. I don't believe you would do any of the things you just described. You don't have any actions that indicate to me that you would do that. Keeping the team and keeping the group accountable, and having an intervention that really kind of said, look, we've got to dig a level deeper into how we feel. We've got to dig a level deeper into kind of what our interactions are with each other in order for us to get to the next level of performance. We need to go away and we need to really look hard at, are we willing to do everything it takes to be successful? What is doing everything it takes to be successful going to look like for us as a group? And how are we going to find that? So we sent the players away that evening, and they went and they met at one of the players' houses. They had a chat. They talked with some of their teammates. And as coaches, we kind of came back in and we said, okay, so if they come back, if they've done their homework, what do we do? Right? What do we do? And what we knew we needed to do is we needed to reward them, right? We reward them for their hard work, but do something that's, again, meaningful. So we came back in and we had another tournament with a reward. But instead of having some of the pieces in that tournament that were intended to cause a storm, we had pieces in that tournament that were intended to unite and connect. Each team had a coach that was assigned to them. Each player had a list of actions we wanted to see from them in that game. We shared with them what we were expecting. We gave teams different ways to gain points or gain success within the game so that we could reward the behaviors we wanted to see our players bring about to make us successful. So with a reward on the line, with a tournament in their hands, with incentives to create behaviors, we brought around the challenging and the difficult and the awkward conversation and brought it into kind of a rewarding practice that brought us back onto track for where we were going and what we were trying to achieve as a group. And, again, as with everything, we wrap that portion up with a bit of a debrief and a bit of a reflection on kind of how that day went and what that was going to lead to for us in our next steps. And that's an example of some of the small maybe debriefs or reflections we do throughout a year, throughout a season. But as well, debriefing and reflecting is a massive part of what building and designing a program and carrying it about year after year kind of entails.
Yeah, and so we've talked about how crucial or how critical being integrated for the service providers is, but debriefs and reflection, as well as the intervention piece, is also a time for us to get to be like the S in IST, right? We get to provide support. And so yeah, a really big part of my job is to see how can we support the program to achieve the goals that they have? How can we support athletes to thrive? How can we support the coaches so that they feel like they want to keep coming back and keep working and stay in the environment that they love so much, right? And so debriefs, as well as reflections, are some of those really powerful tools that you absolutely can use. One of the troubles with debriefs is that people are always kind of trying to find the perfect debrief, and I find that that's almost a standard that's impossible to actually meet, right? So in the 5 years that we've been in this program, the debriefs have looked different every single year, because again, the team composition has been different. Our goals and objectives, although very similar, the way or the process we go about achieving them has looked a little bit different, and so they require different things. Um, but when I come to the training sessions, that's actually one of the roles that I have, is often to observe and then to offer the coaches insights into what it is that I'm seeing from my different perspective, and with my mental performance hat on, and then to offer them some either language or some cues that they can bring into the debrief that they had. In our intake, one of the things that Barry and I discussed is how vocal do I want to be? So, as he alluded to in the interventions, I'm often removed or in the background, and that's the place where I prefer to be, because Barry and I discussed how it actually is much more meaningful for the players at this level and on this team to hear it from the coaches or to hear it from him. So, it's one of the strengths that I find Barry has and that I've highlighted to him over the years, is that he's really great at taking the language or the observations that I offer, but kind of putting them through a filter in his head and then producing language that feels really authentic and that connects with the group really well. So when we're doing debriefs, that's one of the key things, is just understand what is the message that you're trying to deliver. Give yourself a little bit of a break, that it might not be perfect or it might not be exactly right or phrased exactly the right way every single time. But understand, or again, pay attention to those cues. What are athletes, what do they seem to be responding to that day? How can you shape or transform the debrief that you want to? If you aren't comfortable with a debrief, do you want to go with a standard template? So we had one year, for instance, where we had 5 questions that we kind of kept going back to. And what changed about them was either the order that we asked them in, or either omitting some in certain practices, or the types of responses we were asking for on certain days. But before we were ready to grow up, right, we were at a point where having a standard template and knowing what was going to come was what the team needed. This year, that's not necessarily what the team needed, right? So you shift and you can adapt your debriefs as long as, yeah, you as a coach are clear, or as a coaching staff are clear on what do we want to accomplish with this debrief. Because if you bring it back to your philosophy, if you bring it back to your identity, if you bring it back to your goals and objectives, and you lead the debriefs and the reflection with that intention in mind, then a lot of the times you're going to be much more successful than if you go about it and just go through the motions of doing a debrief because that's what you do, right? There are certain training sessions where we didn't have a debrief because we looked at it and we're like, you know what? Nothing that we say is going to get into the player's head. They're just so drained that today a debrief isn't going to be useful. Instead, what we need to do is maybe integrate some more reflection. So send them home with a question that they can sit and talk to their roommates about, or that they can mull over that night and then come with an answer tomorrow. But how you want to shape your debrief, or how you want to build in reflection into your training sessions, can vary based on the environment, can vary based on the level, can vary based on who you are or on the day, right? So know as a coach that, like, it is a tool that you can absolutely use, but you are not limited in how you want to use it. And there are some really great resources out there that already exist on existing structures for debriefs and things that have proven effective in a variety of different contexts. But feel free to play around and experiment and kind of pick and choose the pieces of the debrief that sit well with you, or that feel authentic and genuine to you and your philosophy and the goals that you're trying to achieve, and then lead with those things in mind as you make your decisions with your debriefs.
Yeah, debriefing is a really important skill, and it's a massive piece of the learning process for the players, whether that be part of a practice, whether that be us learning as a program after a season, whether that be us, evolving players' understanding of their interactions with each other in other areas, right? And I lean back oftentimes, and Renee will cringe at times when I say, "Oh, well, this is just like the what, so what, now what that we talk about in coaching and leading effectively," which isn't. It's not always as simple as that, but we come through these ideas of how are we using the discussion we wrap up, or we have to create action and move forward, right? And I think that's a big part of that action oriented side of things is what's the debrief and even the pre-brief that we have when we're doing some of that. So the debriefing example we have is what we've learned about the group of players that we've been working with over the last few years is it always takes us at the end of a year 2 to 3 debriefs before we really get to the meat and the bones of what our next steps are going to be, before we really get to something action oriented. We try different things to try and speed up that process, but we're not always successful. At the end of last year, we had a team that was really broken and really hurt. They crashed out of playoffs in a way that they felt was embarrassing. They didn't feel reflected who they were, and they were really struggling. And we went into a winter where some of our older, more senior players were lashing out a little bit at some of the first and second year guys. They were making it difficult. They were, in their terms, being older brothers, and that's not always exactly what you want in a group. And as we were debriefing the year and trying to kind of set our feet on the ground to get ready for the 2024 season, one day, one of the younger guys just said, like, I can't take it anymore. I can't have these guys continuing to treat me like this. I keep telling them I don't want to be talked to like this. And another one of the young players spoke up and said, I can't believe this. This is unbelievable. Why do they keep treating me like this? And the older guys, really feeling like what they were trying to do was treat them the way that they would have wanted. We invite you every Saturday to come watch Prem with us. We would have killed if the seniors, when we were in our first year, invited us to hang out with them ever. And we try and, invite you around. We want to have you here. And they're like, yeah, but we don't want to be there because you don't treat us well, And we had this tension within the group, and guys who were stuck in between the two groups, like, well, I can hang out with everybody. I like all these guys. It's all wonderful. And we had to kind of have a couple of meetings. And we had a meeting with the older players in which we really debriefed with them and said, like, what did you take from some of the younger guys, speaking to you like that? Well, they didn't think it was reasonable, and they felt they were doing a good job, and they were really kind of holding them accountable. And we talked to them a lot about, well, do you think they should have a say in how they're treated? And we used kind of debriefing techniques of having the players reflect on the behavior, reflect on how they thought others felt, reflect on the words that were said to them, and the messages they were given, and think, you know, is this who you want to be? We were very lucky to have, um, we brought a leader who was, as a player, kind of maybe a toxic leader in his late years with the program, but a phenomenal coach as he moved into the coaching role. And he had led some of the guys who are now seniors in the program, and he was able to be in the room and look at them and say, like, look, guys, I wasn't proud of all my actions. Like, I look back on that now and I think, like what did I like why was I part of that, and why did I act that way? And showed like incredible vulnerability for the players as part of this really important conversation, a really important reflection on, how are we, what is the culture of the way that the older players in our organization or our program treat each other, and how do we be better with that? And we hit a point in the meeting where we were able to really, like, actually live demonstrate power dynamics in really kind of putting them in a position where they needed to challenge me on my position, and and their discomfort with challenging that power dynamic was difficult for them. And we've worked hard over time to create a space in our program that doesn't have a obvious or a huge power dynamic on a day-to-day basis, but a coach can bring that up when they need to, I suppose. And the players kind of, like, their jaws hit the floor a little bit, and they took a step back, and they just looked at us and they said, look, can we have some time to meet on our own? And we understand we're going to take some action. And the coaches, we came up to the soccer field where we were going to have kind of a game night that night in the winter. It was a scrimmage against another team. And we were debriefing and talking about, how did that go? Well, that was uncomfortable. I hope that, like, I hope we can bring them back on side. And I remember walking out of my coach's office, and one of the things we had talked to the senior players about, or one of the things that had come up in the last couple of conversations, was the group chat, and how the group chat had become like a toxic place in the program. And I remember walking out and walking into the field, and hearing one of the guys say, "Oh man, I don't know what just happened. Our group chat was deleted. It's gone." And the guys went, did your group chat get deleted? And started to talk about that. And we're kind of overhearing things, and over the next little bit, oh, we've got a new group chat. Oh, uh, all of our names are different. And we started to realize that what had happened in our debrief with those older players, and what had happened after we left that room, was they continued to talk with each other. They continued to share. They continued to evolve, and they made decisions based on a debrief that helped them reflect on their actions, helped them reflect on their behaviors, helped them reflect on their influence the program. They made decisions independently after that meeting with the coaches that led to them creating a monumental shift in the culture of the program that permeated through and allowed us to have a lot of opportunities for us to perform this year, allowed for a tighter connection, allowed for an environment that was much healthier and much better. Even had one of our rookies this year say, "Yeah, when I was here last winter, like, I thought the guys were all pretty nice, but there was a bit of tension, and some of the younger guys were a bit negative." And he says, and like, he's like, "It's really clear that that's all gone now. Like, these guys are unbelievable, and it's an unbelievably connected group." But through the debrief, the reflection, the thoughtful and challenging debrief, the action oriented kind of behaviors of the players following that, we were able to kind of see a debrief really impact the team, and will impact the team for kind of years going forward.
And
Uh,
again, a lot of that was possible because in the early stages when we were forming our identity, we gave the players that space to create their own identity. We empowered them to think through who they wanted to be, who we are, right? And so it became one of those things that, like, the more that you can build that trust over time and be patient about building it, the more that it will pay off in the end, right? But a lot of it is, as a coach, you have to know, when is it time to step in and guide versus when is it time to take a step back and let them run with it, right? And because we were able to cultivate that trust and empower the players to take action on their own, when we gave them the opportunity to do so later after a really intense debrief, they carried that through, right? Because they knew that that's who they could be and that's what they could do, and that we would give them that space to do those things, and we trusted them, and so that trust then became a mutual thing.
Yeah. And so, as we kind of, have now talked about really the cycle or the process that we carry out, right? That idea of beginning with intake and the integration, moving into like what is the identity and how do we identify and how do we support the identity of the team, how the language and culture builds, supports, drives um, the group, how we use interventions to kind of get us back on track, kind of, work to fix behaviors or fix things that are coming up throughout the periods. And then the debrief and reflection is a major opportunity for learning within the program, whether that be in a practice, after a practice, at the end of a season, whenever we're doing that, the intent is that we learn, we grow, and we build and we get better, right? And we see these things, all of these pieces intertwine within the integration of our mental performance on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and on an annual basis. We jump back and forth from all of these different kind of pieces of the cycle throughout a year.
Yeah, and I would say one of the things that was maybe a little bit different this year with the cycle is that we tended to have a lot more pre-briefs in terms of like integrating the mental performance piece, right? So the training sessions would be designed, but a lot of the coaches would come to me and be like, okay, what do we think that would be effective here? Or they would come in with their own reflection questions and like let me know what those were. And so that was a shift a little bit in the culture this year from previous years, and aligned with this idea of us wanting to grow up. It wasn't just the players that needed to grow up, it was also us as a coaching staff, and growing together as well, right? But that can be another tool that coaches use. So we often talk about the debriefs, but you can incorporate the reflection piece in the way that you pre-brief or that you set sessions up ahead of time as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, Renee and I have told a bunch of stories. We've tried to kind of connect some of what happened with us over the course of the year, uh how we've carried things out over the course of our time together, right? Integrating mental performance into our university soccer program, using it as a tool to kind of guide us. A few simple takeaways, lessons maybe we hope you take. Um, you can kind of see these on the screen on the what am I talking? The right hand side of the screen, I think you're looking at. I'm trying to figure out if it's flipped or not when I'm on Zoom, but I'm pretty sure it's not. What those are is those are some of the principles we have for success. Those hang in our locker room. Those are things that the players look at. Those are things that guide us. Those are things that we tie the integration of our mental performance to. I think, for me, really important, for us as coaches to understand that it's not a one size fits all. The process changes. It's ever evolving. It's got to be something that fits for you. What fit for us at UNB and for Renee and I doesn't necessarily fit for everyone. Um, you know, me working with a different mental performance consultant will have a different outcome. Will have a different look. Renee working with different coaches has different outcomes, has different looks. It feels different, and we all have to find the thing that meets our needs, meets our kind of hopes and our desires for the program.
But a
You know,
lot of that has to start with the willingness to, again, understand or know yourself and know where you're coming from too, right? Because the more awareness you have there, the more that you can then impart that on the people with whom you want to work.
yeah. So at this point, I guess open the floor to questions. Anybody have any questions? As if we haven't talked enough, I guess.
Okay, I'll just ask one because no one else is. Very interested
You
to
don't
hear this
have
in general.
to.
Very interested to hear this in general. Thank you very much for your time tonight. I coach the beautiful game as well. It's a fascinating environment for so many different reasons. I was intrigued to hear your recollection, Barry, of that game at St. FX when you were 1-0 down and you turned it around to win the game 2-1. As a coach, I know that time at halftime is so important, so precious to communicate effectively. But given what you were saying about the culture you've been created, in terms of problem solving on that day, how much of that was actually on the players as opposed to yourself?
Like, if you ask my players, I don't really know much about soccer. Like, they'll tell you, like, Barry doesn't really have much of a clue. So really, like, that day, I probably came in, I had 4 or 5 questions that I wanted to talk to the players about. We had 2 situations that we thought were really causing us problems. I don't know if you watched the game or not. They were finding players. They were constantly finding players kind of in between our midfielders, kind of in front of our back line, and like our wide midfielder and our center midfielder, just causing problems. So like the players kind of knew that. So it was just about like, okay, how do we fix that? Where are they getting those opportunities? What do we need to do to change that? And then how do we move forward? And the players then orchestrated the rest themselves.
Okay, no, and that's obviously based on the culture you created. That's, yeah, okay, perfect.
Yeah. Well, and like I say, Guy, like we spent the year beginning with like we're like how do we solve soccer problems? Leading into that game, we had spent our whole training camp training soccer problems. So they had talked about problem solving. They had been engaged. They had been kind of the primary piece of it all along. Could we have done that 2 years earlier? Probably not. But by that point, we were ready.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And you're a very humble man. I'm sure you know a ton about the game.
Yeah, tell my players that, please. Just let them know. Give them that message. I appreciate it.
Okay, I know a couple of them.
We got a couple questions in the chat. Ooh, hold on.
I can read it for you, Barry. How much FaceTime do you get with your team per week? So for field training sessions, pre-training meetings, debriefs, etc.
Oh yeah. So at the university level, we're blessed. We get a lot of time with the players. Sometimes almost too much. So what we would have is we would be kind of on or around the field about 2 hours a day with each other. We would be usually about 20-minute pre-training meetings. So doing a little bit of video, going over opposition, going over some of our training from the previous day, pre-briefing our training session that day, maybe about 20 minutes a day. And then, usually 30 to 45 minutes after. We might be talking with individuals, we might be debriefing with the group, we might be debriefing with coaches. All of our coaches have a group of players that they're kind of assigned to interact with. So they interact with those players usually, between 5 minutes and an hour on a weekly basis. So we have a lot of FaceTime with our players. Like we see them really every day, but Monday. And I think Renee gets messages from them like 24/7. So she may get even more like text time even than some of the coaches do.
That was one of the things, like my first year with the team, I didn't have all of their numbers, and so I wasn't messaging them as frequently. But one of the players overheard Barry and I talking one day about the game that they had just gone away to play, and I was noting some of my observations, and the player just looked over and was like, "You watch our games?" I was like, "I watch all of your games, and I do for all of the teams that I work with, in case any of the players ever have questions or ever do want to talk with me." But it was interesting in that moment to kind of see that light bulb go off of like, oh, like she's actually part of this team, right? And so at that point in time, then the number of messages and the number of follow-up conversations that I would have with players started to grow exponentially. And over time, yeah, it grows a lot more the more that they kind of see you around. So Barry talked about maybe seeing the players too much. I only usually go out to the field like once, maybe twice a week, and then to games and things like that. But I will see them individually outside of training sessions. And yeah, we'll communicate with some of them over the phone and things like that.
Yeah. If there are no more questions, I think you'll generally find both Renee and I are fairly open books. I don't want to speak for Renee, but if you ever want to contact me, ask any questions, come see a training session, get involved, or see anything that we do, you can find me on the UNB Reds website under the men's soccer team. If you go to coaches, then my email's there. Don't be afraid to reach out. We're very open. We love to share in the coaching process, and I'm sure that there's lots of people here that could come see and help us learn what we're doing as well. So don't be afraid to reach out. If you have any questions about anything we've talked about, please don't be afraid to reach out. I'm happy certainly to answer, talk more, share my experience for whatever that's worth. And yeah, happy to go with that.
Yeah, thanks for spending the Wednesday evening with us. But yeah, if you do have questions, or again, we know reflection's an ongoing process. So if things come to you at a later point in time, please feel free to reach out, and we happy to collaborate and answer questions and talk about mental performance pretty much anytime.
Thanks so much, Barry and Renee. Really enjoyed this really thoughtful presentation, and thanks everybody for joining us. On behalf of Sport New Brunswick and our colleagues across Atlantic Canada, thanks again. And our next Podium Performance Series, there's one scheduled for February 19th, actually, with Dr. Steve Gennaro on championing self-activated athlete success. So I will put the link in the chat, but the recording as well will be available on the CSIA YouTube channel. So thanks, team, and have a great evening.